moving on to the next segment is going to be, touching on, strategy, leadership, and culture. With culture being at the center. Culture is often a misunderstood word, and what Prabir is going to try to do is try to demystify culture as it intertwines with leadership and with strategy as far as it relates to your businesses. Prabir Jha is an alumnus of Stephens College, Delhi and XLRI Jamshedpur, and currently is the founder and CEO of Prabir Jha People Advisory. Prabir Jha has his first 10 years was as a civil servant, where he was part of the Indian Ordnance Factories, and after 10 years of being in the civil service, he switched over to the corporate world, where he spent his first stint with Thermax and with Tech Mahindra. After that, Prabir was the global CHRO at two NYSE-listed Indian companies, Dr. Reddy's and Tata Motors, after which he was the group CHRO at Reliance Industries. He is probably the only HR professional in our country today who's been the head of HR across two NYSE-listed companies. Prabir, over the last many years, has been featured in the list of most admired HR professionals in India and has a number of awards to his credit. He was awarded the Asia HRD Award for outstanding contribution to the field of human resource development. He was named the Digitalist of the Year and has been recently ranked #1 amongst the top HR influencers on Twitter from India. He sits as part of a New York-based think tank of 15 global CHROs called as the Thinking Ahead Group. Prabir is widely recognized as a transformation guru and an accomplished thought leader and tweeter, and is one amongst the widest followed CHROs in the world, with almost over 500,000 followers on his LinkedIn account. So with that, I'm pleased to welcome my friend Prabir to take us forward.
Thank you, Brazil. Thank you.
As Prabir has requested, he would love to make this session as interactive and engaging. So please feel free to stop him at any point in time and challenge him, because he's going to challenge all of you all with questions of his own. So over to you, Prabir.
Thank you. Thank you, Brazil. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Actually, I had promised not to use a deck. But the advantage and the problem with having bright kids at home is they said, Dad, I'll put together something, right? So I will inflict a few slides, but as Burzen said, stop me at any time. You don't have to wait for questions at the end. You'll still have an opportunity. I may not take all the slides. The idea is to try and dispel, and Nachiket, what a wonderful start. And since I had a sense of the dream world that Nachiket is creating for all of us, in terms of what we would like to wear, I changed the subject of my presentation. I'll weave the three issues of strategy, leadership, and culture and the intersect. But I want to connect it with dreams. Many of us in the room are entrepreneurs. Big, small, aspiring to be bigger. The big challenge is it's all about dream. How well you dream, how big you dream, how wide you dream, what nightmares you fear is what is going to actually impact if you're growing your business. And of course, if you need to grow your business to the point that Nachiket also mentioned, finally, we are in the business of people. It doesn't matter what your industry is. If you do not understand the business of people, there is no business. So I'm going to try and use this session more in terms of some perspective sharing, because people, everyone, in fact, I always joke that HR as a subject is something that from the doorman to the chairman, everyone believes they've done a PhD on. It's like me saying Virat Kohli should have played this stroke sitting in my drawing room and watching television. It's very difficult to do, right? And everyone has a point of view, and the agenda of strategy, leadership, and culture is really that way more complex as the world is getting more digital. The world is getting disrupted. Therefore, what demands does it place on leadership? What demands does it place on culture, which appears to be soft, fuzzy? So I'll try and dispel some myths about some of these very popular themes, and hopefully you'll have some questions for me and some takeaways for you that might appeal to you. This entire context, therefore, about building organizations of tomorrow or building dream aspirations for ourselves actually forces us to think about change. Whether you've inherited a business, whether you're wanting to grow a business, whether you want to start a business, one thing which is clear is you are going to be changing. It doesn't matter where you started from. Jimmy, you would agree. What you started with and where your dreams are changing. Nachiket, you just talked about what you've done so far and what else you'd like to get to. It's all about change. And change is starting with the mind. Are you even willing to understand the dimensions of change, the soft dimensions and the hard dimensions of change? You cannot dream if you do not navigate change, and you cannot understand leadership, culture, and strategy if you do not comprehend the nuances of change. And every dimension of change could be contextual. I will not have the time to get into specific details, but bear in mind whether it's your market, it's your consumer, it's your business model, it is preferences that are changing, everything is in the context of change. And strategy, leadership, and culture must respond to this fundamental reality of change, because that is something that is bound to happen. This is how London looked a century ago, and this is how London looks now. I had another very interesting slide. 1913, how the streets of New York looked, and 30 years later, how the main street of New York looked. It had only horse-drawn carriages, one automobile in 1913. It was just the other way around 30 years later. We live in 2022. The rate of change is far more dramatic. And therefore, the demands that are there for you on your strategic thinking, on your leadership, and the culture that you seek to create, challenge or change, has to be therefore exponentially sharper. You do not say, this is me, and for the next 50 years, this is how it will be. That world is dead. It is scary, but if you're in the world of business, if you're in the world of building possibilities and opportunities, imagine that even 100 years today will be changing many, many times over. I have picked some tweets from my, because I tweet and I write almost every day and post on social media. So I've randomly picked some things. My fundamental premise of why this intersection of strategy, leadership, and culture in an ever-changing world does not play out as well as many entrepreneurs and business leaders would want is because they are still trying to solve a pediatric problem with a geriatric solution. And I have an IP on this. I mentioned this to one of my very large employers once, that your fundamental problem is not that you don't understand technology or engineering, you don't understand your consumer. That's your fundamental problem. And it is the arrogance of living in a world which is dead. And that is why I talk about my friend, Icarus. So many of us who know Icarus, he was a mythological character. He had waxen wings. And he realized that when he flapped his wings, he went higher. So what would any person do? Flap still again. And you go higher, flap again. Till you get so close to the sun, as Icarus discovered, his waxen wings melted and he dropped dead. So the point that I'm emphasizing, and all of this is setting the context of how your strategy thinking will need to evolve, is past success does not guarantee future success. Don't overdo what has got you thus far. It is a trap. And the challenge of success is people around you continue to make you believe that this is the way to go. It is lonely at the top. So many of you who are CEOs and business leaders, you would realize this. And when I coach a lot of chief executives, one question I always ask, who on your leadership team challenges you? Most of them put their spoon or fork or knife down. And this is the challenge, why cultures get very sterile, why strategy gets a little obsolete, and why leadership becomes leaders. In fact, in one of the articles I wrote, the challenge with the subject is we talk more about leaders and very little about leadership. And it's a big, big difference. In today's world, you cannot be the prima donna of all the thinking, doing, and being. If you're the leader, you're the big guy, of course it has a huge implication. But it is a myth today to believe you decide leadership. And companies mirror the leader from top to the bottom. And that builds sterility. And that is why the question about fashion. The leader is in fashion today, but the leadership may be actually out of sync of your context. So that's very important. So think different, do different. Am I connecting? Does it make sense with your context? Yeah? Thank you. And please challenge me, stop me anytime. The best of institutions can only be a relic to learn lessons from, unless you renew and reinvent. So it's not just about starting and creating. You also renew yourself if you're 5 years old. 10 years old, you reinvent yourself. You don't wait for 50 years anymore. Structure, talent, culture, and leadership. There is nothing that is beyond question if you want to survive and sustain. These are simple words, but each is a subject by itself. I've had people ask me many a time, Prabir, when will we stop tweaking? When will we stop making changes? I said, let the consumer guarantee me the next 10 years. I will not change anything here. But if the consumer is not willing to guarantee me my tomorrow, everything is subject to change. And that is why strategy is a very, very double-edged sword. Because there was a time when you said strategy and tactics are two very different things. Today, part of your tactical response has to come from very agile strategic thinking. And I'll talk about that in just a while. So first, let me talk about culture. Many people think culture is that soft, fuzzy, nice thing, right? People say, "Mera culture bahut acha hai, unka culture acha nahi hai." It's a good culture, bad culture. I don't agree there is a good or a bad culture. Culture must be what is strategically relevant and aligned. If it is not aligned to your strategic intent and purpose, I don't care what that culture is. It's a misfit. So the biggest myth around cultures is if you're soft and cuddly in a nice teddy bear environment, it's a great culture. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. But let me explain to you at least my view and philosophy of culture. To me, culture is nothing but how we think, behave, relate, and deliver products, experiences, services that create impact for whoever is your audience. So it's think, behave, relate, and do. It is all. It is just not about the little things. It's not about, free pizzas or Cokes in your office. It's a lot deeper than that. So there is no good or bad culture. There is no culture which is just about one dimension of behavior only. It is also the way you think. The problem with culture starts when you don't even get your thinking right. Because we don't understand culture. It seems that it's very flaky. It's very soft. Each one can interpret culture in the manner that they want. But culture is, in fact, I don't even know whether culture eats strategy for breakfast. It does it for lunch and dinner as well. I don't even personally, I've debated this, I don't even think culture flows as a footprint to strategy. Culture is a choice of strategy. When you do your strategy offsites, I tell boards, I said, if culture is going to be a discussion some other day, some other time, you're losing the plot even before you've got it hatched. It is a choice of strategy. And why leadership? And I loved when Burzen proposed this subject. Leadership or leaders are the custodians of culture and strategy. And the ball can get dropped in any of these three circles. It could be the way leaders behave, think or do. It could be the way the culture is relevant or irrelevant in your context today. And of course, your strategy. I mean, you cannot be so intellectually committed to your strategy that even if the world has changed, you will say, I will continue to pursue a strategy. You're a fool. You're not strategically thinking clear. Right? And that's why it's so important to understand culture. And I'll make a few more comments on culture. But culture is really about aggregation. And if any one of you read my article in the Times of India last week, I talked about the ABCDE of leadership. And A was aggregative, the power of aggregation. And as leaders in this room, your job is to make sure that people believe in the power of shared goals. And I will also make a mention in the same breath. I believe the world has come where you will need to atomize almost individual choices for every person for your culture to be relevant. Again, I will talk about leadership in just a while. Leadership has become ambidextrous. So ask yourself the question. There was a time when you would remember people who would say, "Ye mera leadership style hai. I am Tismar Khan. Mera ye leadership style." Have you heard that? Many people have said. I believe that is dinosaur thinking. Your leadership style has to be so flexible that it works for X, Y, and Z as they feel motivated and relevant to that leadership style. People do things for their reasons, not yours. The genius of leadership is to get each one of them to believe that they are doing it for themselves, but actually they're doing it for you. And that's the power of aggregation. So some of you are interested, please Google me up and read that article, The Power of Aggregation. And ultimately, it's about building that sense of greater accountability. How does an individual person, irrespective of title, rank, hierarchy, tenure, gender, nationality, linguistic bias, continue to believe that I am equally committed and accountable for building the future of an organization and delivering its strategy? So this shift from the individual to the collective is actually one of the biggest demands of both leadership and of culture, because without that, you do not deliver your strategy. And that is why I love building or using this word, shared destiny. Strategy is inherent on building a culture of shared destiny. If you're not able to do that, you have a problem. There are hard ways of building shared destiny. There are softer routes of building shared destiny. But you need to build. And the question, therefore, to ask is, can you cross your heart and believe all your 500 employees, 1,000 employees, or 2,000 employees actually have a shared destiny? If I were to randomly pick 10 people, would I hear the same thing about what are you planning to do? I do not want people to give me full-blown answers. But can they explain to me in their own Hindi, Marathi, Telugu, whatever language, what is the company playing for? What's the business you are in? And many a time you don't get answers, right? And the challenge is people understand the way they seek to understand, not the way you thought they had understood. Important dimension of culture shaping. So I'm going to make a few comments around culture again, more in terms of you to see whether any of these connect with you. Many a time people say one unitary culture. I'm not too sure whether it's a smart leadership thinking or is it even strategically relevant. Should you always have one unitary culture? Or is it okay for subcultures to exist? Your multiple businesses, two businesses are very distinct from each other. Why would you want to force them down to one culture? Would an audit function necessarily have the same culture as a marketing department culture? Where is the elbow room for subcultures? Why do you want to say that the culture in India should be exactly what it is in Brazil? I'm not saying you should not have, but do you need to have? And the question, therefore, of leadership and therefore strategic response shaping is agility, flexibility. Are you able to keep your system and your culture that malleable, that it is suiting the purpose as is relevant for you in a market, in a business, in a geography? And this is not an easy job. And I will confess, I don't hear many boards even understanding issues like that. They understand the balance sheet well, they understand their financials well, but they don't understand this because board composition itself is not plural. It's the same left-brained logic. They all love their Excel sheets, they all love their numbers. But the challenge is the opportunity of creation, and you said it so beautifully, Nachiket. The possibilities of future is a right-brained exercise. And therefore, there is a problem even in the construct of leadership, in the construct of boards. So one is that. Second is, people think culture, it's kind of given, and now so shall it be. All of us have heard of Kathak. We've liked Kathak, it's a dance form. If I'd asked, if we were sitting in the 10th century and asked, is Kathak part of Indian culture? What would you have said? You would have said, no, it didn't exist. It came with the Turks. Today we say it's an Indian art form. It's an Indian dance form. Culture evolves. Culture is like a flowing river, right? And therefore, in your organizations, ask yourself, is your culture adequately morphing, evolving? Or is it like a still pond? Is it static? Is it dammed? And if the culture is dammed, unfortunately, your business is likely to get dammed. So think well, ask yourself these simple questions, or get someone to kind of help push you to answer and respond to some of those questions. So it's dynamic, it's not static. Your VUCA realities of business, volatility, uncertainty, complex, ambiguity, all of that is going to impact your business. Is your culture coming in the way, or is your culture enabling it? I find many of my client companies and from my own executive life, people say, "Ye hamara culture hai." What is the point of pickling your culture if it is not actually adding strategic value? And if you want to change your culture, it doesn't take 5 years. And this is one of the things with many of my clients I debate. If you're thinking you're going to take 5 years to change a culture, you will never change your culture. You will be a good captain, you'll go down with your ship. But if you want to change your culture to be relevant to the context in which you operate, and you need to then move your orbits of culture, where is the pivot? Where would you reposition? Which orbit would you go? And how to do that is about all the different levers of deployment. So let me give you a small example. Imagine the river Ganga flowing. I come from Bihar, right? It used to cut the one unified state of Bihar into two parts, right? North and south. And here's a river which is going smooth. But imagine there are tributaries and there are distributaries. Look at the tributaries of your culture shaping, your organization design. If you have 15 levels in your organization, stop dreaming about being an agile or an innovative company. You will not be. Look at your performance systems. What do you measure? Lead measures, lag measures. If you're only going to be bean counting, you will never have a culture which is going to be actually leading your future. What is your reward recognition philosophy? What do you reward? What do you reprimand? Small things. What do you celebrate? You never celebrate. I was talking to a client and he said, "We want to be a very innovative company." I said, "In the last 5 years, tell me in your awards night, how many failures did you celebrate?" None. You'll never be an innovative company. All of these are ways in which the tributaries contribute to culture influencing. Distributaries, am I an entrepreneurial culture? Am I a risk-taking culture? Am I a culture which fixes accountability? Am I a mediocre culture? Am I a high-performing culture? These are outcomes. And outcomes happen depending on your inputs. But we don't want to talk about inputs because that's cast in stone. Mere baap dada ne bhi aise hi kiya tha. Boss, that worked in that era. It made sense. It doesn't make sense today. So it's a lot of honest, cross your heart questions and responses that help you move to that. I've talked about subcultures. And of course, finally, the power of trust and conversations. Conversation is not communicating to your people. It's communicating with your people. Dyad, triad. Jimmy was talking about, whether it's 500 people he wants to meet or 50 people. There's no one right or wrong answer, but it has an impact on the culture. Are you the one who's speaking, or are people speaking? Is it okay for you to say, "I don't know"? Vulnerability of leadership. How vulnerable are you willing to be? Or do you want to be Rana Sangha? See, it is all very, very soft, simple questions, but it is very difficult to change because everyone believes this has worked for me, and it is very difficult not to be an Icarus. And therefore, when you're trying to understand the interplay of leadership and culture with your strategy, these are all the things that become very important. Because your culture is a product of your past, but the invitation that I would have for you is, are you shaping your culture for tomorrow? You can buy companies. Most M&As fail, not because the maths was not right, because culture was something they never understood right. And it can actually kill organizations. So that's something which is very important. So whatever your scale and size of your company today, my request is please look at these dimensions. The unsaid, fissures which are there in your organization, which is impacting the sense of shared destiny. Because each one is receiving everyone else's action from their lens of what is culture. And therefore, strategy need not be a prisoner of your current culture. If your strategy is different, your culture will need to change. Repudiation must then be a conscious strategic leadership choice. If your play is shifting, you're moving your customer segment, you're moving your product segment, your consumer mix has changed, your consumer preferences have changed. You're becoming from a Maharashtra organization to a global company. You will have to appear to have changed your culture, irrespective of how well it worked for you so far. And therefore, the strategy culture play is a very, very conscious choice. What are you going to change of your culture? And therefore, the linked question, what is culture? Culture is how people behave. If you still celebrate what you celebrated all this time, your culture will not change. If your talent mix remains what it was all these years, your culture will not change. And that is why it is prudent to think which cards will you pick and which cards will you drop. Yes, please.
In terms of what was the thought behind the input, the actual input, and then
I'll share one or two instances, so there's a company, an agrochemical company, which was of a certain scale size, largely an India play company. It suddenly makes an LBO of huge proportion, many times ahead of it, and a completely global business. How do you think this company will pivot its culture when your entire business, your workforce, etc., has started becoming global? 80% of that company's business is overseas, right? 80% of its employee base is now global. One small thing, they shifted their headquarters of their top management team to a global location. I think 60% or 70% of their top leadership is global. The cultural norms, therefore, which was historically very Indian in its origin, etc., has to by design appear global. Small example. Other issue, you are of a certain small scale and size, but you have now added 3 different lines of business, right? Let me give you an example. One of my past employers, they historically were in one particular segment. They decided to get very aggressive and go into what fundamentally were service lines of business. One of the big things of changing their value statement and their entire policy redesign was to make sure that it gets geared for service sectors, not from the command and control realities of a more classical organization or classical business. So there are many such reasons, but the fact is it is very counterintuitive. And that's why I'm raising this, because people will say this is the way we've always done. And my response always is, guys, think of a better alibi or a reason. This is not good enough, that we have always done. And the smart leaders, the smart strategy is to be able to move very quick. And therefore, building agility in your culture is a very important dimension, right? So this is how, depending on what your strategy is, what the play in your industry is, where are the dark clouds emerging? They are, I firmly believe, whether it is careers or business opportunities, the next big wave is going to come from the end of the wide-angled prism, from the fringes, not at the end of the tunnel. But is your thinking wide-angled enough? We believe that my competition is ABC. No, sir, your competition is not going to be ABC. It is going to be 1, 2, 3. And a lot of this will have to be, therefore, part of your strategy thing, because talent, culture, leadership behavior, choice of talent, everything will change. And I'll talk about talent in just a while. Does that help somewhere? Yeah, thank you. So it's all about aligning. This is the job of leadership, alignment. Ourselves, our teams, our efforts. I don't want to delve into that. So it is bringing that point about connecting with innovation and transformation. Unless you innovate, I believe that if you have big scale, gigantic scale, you can be in a commoditized business. Otherwise, please build something which is innovative. Not only a ticket to play, but a ticket to win. That is the job of leaders. What is your right to win? And unless you discover your right to win, and that can only happen when you think of innovation. And innovation may not always happen internally. It's that wide angle thinking. What can you steal as something from someone else's doing and behaving and apply it in your context? There's a difference between invention and innovation. I'm not talking about invention. We are talking about innovation. I think, Nachiket, when he said, I stole this frog's, whatever color scheme, etc. Innovation. Why did you and I not think? Why did he think? We've got to be looking around all the time, picking ideas and seeing how we can redefine our problems to redefine our solutions, and integrative thinking. Pulling it all together. Ideas can come from anyone. And that's really what the DLC is trying to do. Get a lot of different ideas and learnings and see, hey, you know what, in that melting pot, can I get two things which I can go away with? I will not get into details, but this is a very important thing, why strategy derails and why culture and leadership are accountable. This is not my slide. This is from one of my favorite authors called Patrick Lencioni, so I must disclose this is not my slide, but I love this, so I'm sharing it with you. Most times, companies do not deliver the kind of business outcome that they are supposed to deliver because, and whether you're the management team or its hierarchical pyramid, there is absence of trust. Cross your hearts. You will relate with some of these experiences yourself from your past lives or maybe your current realities. When there is absence of trust, what happens? People are scared of conflict. They don't want to debate because if I say this, I'll be misunderstood. So they keep quiet. When there is absence of trust and there is fear of conflict, what happens? They'll say whatever the boss has said is fine. But there is not enough commitment. It's not authentic co-ownership. You told me. Many a time they will go out and say, well, that's what the boss said, but I don't agree with it. But in the room when he asked, everyone's on board? They said, yes. But that's not commitment. That's compliance. So lack of commitment. When there is lack of commitment, there is avoidance of accountability. I had never said yes to that. You see, this is a cultural reality of how you're getting your culture to be shaped. And when there is avoidance of accountability, there is inattention to results because you're always happy to give an alibi. So it's a very simple construct. But culture, this is how it all gets impacted. And imagine if there was no absence of trust, if people were willing to debate, disagree. Out of that debate, discussion, whatever decisions came would lead to stronger commitment. With stronger commitment, everyone is rowing in the same direction. And when everyone is rowing in the same direction, you actually achieve your strategic outcome. Leadership, culture, strategy. Make sense? Dysfunctional leadership teams easily wreck the best strategic aspirations. Individuals may be great, but collectively they fail. Imagine the cost of having such a team at the top. Unimaginable. Intervene before it is too late. So it doesn't matter what is the scale and size of your operation. You've got 5 leaders at the top. How good are they? Leadership is a collective sport. It is not a solo sport. Leadership is about ambidextrous behavior. It is not either or anymore. It is on the one hand and on the other hand. It is and. It's the power of the and. Leadership is a difficult business. Unfortunately, in India particularly, everyone wants to correlate leadership with titles. But that's not true. Unfortunately, money is also linked because you have bad classical HR thinking that a higher title is what gets you better money. Why should it be? Right? So a lot of this is really about you don't know what's working, what's not working. Psychographic makeups of people are so different. What motivates one does not motivate the other. Are you willing to flex enough? How do you and how quickly are you able to allow people to deal with their differences? Are people comfortable having conversations and open debates and discussions, or is it more an order-taking ecosystem? Issue of culture, issue of role modeling of the leader. How the leader presents himself or herself is how the team start mimicking behavior. When the team challenges you. Who do you hire? Do you hire people better than you, smarter than you, brighter than you? I am not a believer of diversity and inclusion, by the way. And I've written extensively on it because unfortunately it has been seen only through the lens of gender. My thesis is, please be in the business of building cultures of pluralism, where there's diversity of thinking. My daughter may be a different gender, but her upbringing is as skewed as mine. So we'll think the same way. So, a lot of this so-called, and the reason I asked Nachiket also about that fashion is even in the space of organization thinking, I hate the fashion, copy, copy, copy. When I remember 15, 16 years ago, in my company at that time when I was a CHRO, I made maternity leave for 6 months. The law was 3 months. Today, the law is 6 months. Why did it take 15 months, 15 years for people to get to this point? Even for the government to do. Paternity leave, when I introduced, no one was talking about paternity leave. No MNC was talking about that. When in one of my larger employers, we moved self-approval to any place in India by the lowest employee. It was a shocker. No company in the world, at least operating out of India, no MNC has done that. But the issue is if you want to create a culture of trust and ownership, you've got to let go. You cannot create a culture of empowerment and agility and swift decision-making and ownership and say, everything I will decide. So many a time we are not conscious, but every small thing impacts agility, innovation, ownership, response. And everyone must retire from the same company and become a consultant to the same company. Builds a certain culture. Different dimensions, right? I'm just giving you a flavor, but this is what as entrepreneurs, as leaders of your business, you must be very conscious of, because this lifelong employment, tenure-based thing, I personally think is a trap. Let people grow, let people go on, let there be great brand ambassadors of your company. But do you have the relevant mix of talent as relevant today? So at the end of the day, I'll just give a little flavor and then I'll take questions. The game of culture or strategy execution or what the job of a leader is fundamentally in the space of what I call talent. I believe talent is a moving definition. What is talent for something today may not be talent tomorrow. And it is okay. Some may be able to reposition, retool, reskill. Some may not. And therefore, you have to be paranoid about what is talent to you. I'm not talking about degrees. Not everyone has to be an MBA. Not everyone has to be a premier college pass out. But is it talent as relevant to you? Sometimes you escalate your cost because you don't need an MBA. You need a BCom passed guy with good Excel sheet. That's what you need. So are you asking yourself counterintuitive questions? Because the culture that will attract a certain talent may be different from what will attract a different breed of talent. See, you see how it's all interconnected? Otherwise, we say there is great resignation. Yeah, because you are actually not thinking through. It's not thought through fully. So you're burning cash, you're wondering, you're doing more of the same thing, spending more money, you're not solving the real problem. Skill relevance, people behavior. Depending on what behaviors you believe are crucial to the culture you want to create, list them down clearly. I don't like the word values because values can be interpreted in 101 ways. I like what are those observable behaviors that are mission critical for you to succeed. It's a business issue. What does integrity mean? It's not about financial integrity. Integrity to me is if you made a promise to me that it will be done by tomorrow at this cost, whatever it is done. It's integrity. But unless you explain that, you don't know how people will move. So culture shaping is really about shaping the right behaviors, supporting, evangelizing, celebrating the right behaviors, and reprimanding behaviors which no longer matter. Small example. We were a risk-averse company, so the culture was all about check, 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 check. That's the culture you became. Now you suddenly want to unleash yourself and become entrepreneurial. If you don't change everything of your HR process, business process, and reward and recognition program to shift from compliance to bona fide failures and mistakes, and therefore entrepreneurship, you will actually be barking up the wrong tree. So there are these interconnections which are very important, and trainability, some people, of course, pick the skills up. So the ability to wear a talent hat is not commonplace. One of my biggest challenges with leaders and board members is this. Because it is not a convenient conversation. When you challenge them, what really is talent? And Nachiket, you again talked about what is talent in your industry, in your world. And the fact that many people who've historically done it don't want to be in that space. How will you Reimagine your talent catchment area. What are newer catchment areas? I have done a lot of counterintuitive hiring even at the senior most levels. Why should the guy come from the same industry? Because everyone then is coming with the same way the one who did it in another organization, the same industry. Nothing is going to change. So a lot of this is very important. And at the end of the day, we are actually creating bigger problems. So redefine talent, build your people, break silos, because unless you actually think very different as leaders, you're not going to be thinking about transformation. Whether it is from 500 crores to 5,000 crores or from 5,000 crores to 50,000 crores, you need to have enough of diversity of thinking, enough of firepower, enough of challengers in your ecosystem. And that is the choice of leaders. That is the culture that will attract a certain breed of people and not attract. And that's why culture shaping is very important. And if you can atomize experiences for different people, you would actually have created cultures which are very rich and not cultures of sterility, which is the problem that we have. So finally, it is no longer the span of control, but the sphere of influence that we are talking about. Leadership is in the business of influence. It is not about control. It's not about your title. It's not about how many people report to you. It's a huge change and implication to cultures, because many cultures are very hierarchical, especially in this part of the world. Right? And unless you get people to understand, it doesn't matter. How do you work in a place where everyone assembles and then disaggregates? No one reports to anyone. What culture will that call for? What kind of leaders would you need to get such an ecosystem in place? So let's not, so this is almost my exhortation to all brilliant minds in the room. Let's not regret we failed ourselves. As leaders, this is what we have to ask ourselves. We are living in a world of such opportunity. There are no Bibles to always go back and refer to. There is no SOP manual that we need to do. We actually can challenge and reinvent and reimagine the world. Let's not regret. Leave behind a legacy that truly matters. That's the business that will actually survive beyond you. And people will remember you for whatever. So if we want to win, we need to first believe we can. All skeptics notwithstanding, it is not enough, but it is a non-negotiable. So the entire play of leadership, culture, and strategy is starting with your fundamental premise. Do you want to win? Your ticket to win decides your strategy. Your strategy decides and impacts your culture. The choice of and mix of leadership, everything flows from there. And therefore, it's a very, very self-iterative process. And it doesn't matter what scale and size you are, what industry you are. This works equally well in every organization, in every context. Your answers may be very unique for yourself, but as a broad baseline, it always works. So thank you very much for listening. That's what I had as my take for the evening for you. And if there are questions, I'm happy to take any questions.
Prabir, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
During my career of 25 years, I've worked with about 250 corporates as the designers. And when you work as a designer, you interface from a Lala organization to an MNC,
right.
CEOs and vice presidents to entrepreneurs. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the finest. And very often, the biggest mistake organizations I feel make, and some of the biggest organizations I'm talking about, they don't define their culture. We keep talking about a culture because culture is different things in different people's mind. Unless and until it comes out and there is a narrative, then the culture is at least defined. Leave alone their belief that culture needs to be agile and needs to change and shift like you guided. Most people feel strategy is decided by our culture. Like you said earlier, culture is like omnipresent and it's going to be cast in stone. This is what we've inherited and this is our Bajaj culture and this is our Panpara culture.
Okay.
But culture has to move with strategy. It's the other way around. Strategy decides the culture and strategy is decided by your requirement and need and vision and ambition of the business. So I think it's been a wonderful session. I actually made sure I called my key people and made sure that they are present in the room to listen to you because I saw them walking outside because these are golden words. Most times people don't understand when you as a leader are trying to break your head and decide and say, let's have a meeting and define the organization's culture. People think boss has gone mad. Instead of leaving very urgent and important things, he's wasting time doing all this frivolous thing. This is not frivolous. This is at the core essence and foundation of the organization. So I am very happy words of wisdom. You've covered slides which are really multi-dimensional. There's a deep-rooted meaning. One can actually sit with each slide. I saw you taking pictures of a couple of slides and reflect on the slide for a couple of hours. Each is such a meaningful slide and has so much of an importance to our businesses. I really, really compliment, and I'm so happy that you're a part and parcel of DLC and heading us globally for our HR committee.
You so much.
Thank you, Prabir, for doing this. I'm sure you guys have questions for Prabir. Over to you.
Yes, please.
Being small and medium, we work with a lot of workforce that might not have the ambition or the desperation to keep unfolding to the next level. So how much freedom is too much freedom?
How much freedom is enough freedom?
Is too much freedom. We also want to run organizations like Google does. So I don't have a leave policy, for example, but I don't know if when it's getting exploited. So what exactly is the differentiator when we say, for example, when you introduce a 6-month maternity leave or a paternity leave, all these things are great. We also want to do all those things and probably will someday. But how do we define that it's not at the cost of productivity that these things are happening?
So first is these are the myths, and very large companies live with their own assumptions, which are often misplaced, right? That people are going to be fraudulent. It's not true. My fundamental belief has been that if there is any HR policy which is more than a page, throw it out the window. I've actually done it. Every company I've inherited, volumes, I said, throw it out of the window. The important thing is they must be enablers. No policy is designed for 100% compliance. In today's world, there will always be exceptions and very bona fide reasons for exceptions. 5,000 rupees is my hotel accommodation. No hotel is available. It costs 6,000 rupees. But it's better for me to get back tomorrow than to wait for 3 days. Why can't a person decide? If someone is fraudulent about it, exit them and do not allow them to resign and go. Say, I've sacked you. See, companies also like to play very soft. Naam kharab ho jayega. Why? Naam acha hoga. So a lot of assumptions are very misplaced because, as Jimmy said, people don't discuss this. They don't debate it. I tell a lot of my clients, where is your so-called HR agenda on your board retreat or on your management meeting? It's the last item. I said, why do you expect miracles when it's your last priority? With one of the largest companies where I was a CHRO, I told this to the chairman of the company, and I will be honest, 80% of my time there, we started with discussing organization before we discussed numbers. So the question is, who is challenging? Someone is to think different. So where do you start, etc.? Of course, will be your judgment, because I don't know what is your talent. If you're hiring people actually who are people you can't trust, then don't be foolish, right? But then you have a hiring problem. Question, how do I make my hiring smarter? What are the checks and balances? But my belief is it's a waste of time. And I see this, in fact, I've been threatening to write an article on this, jokingly though, Maid Mem Sahab and management. For the last 20 years, I've been telling her I want to write an article. How does a little household help come into the morning in the house? And how does the Mem Sahab actually respond to that particular house help? Is very interesting. Some places it's very liberated. Some people, you start with task. Yahan se nahi nikala, wahan se nahi nikala at 7 o'clock in the morning. What do you think happens to engagement? They will move to the next flat. So you've got to trust before you will be trusted. And the challenge is we micromanage so much, it just drives a lot of sense of ownership and fun. I would never work in a company where the boss asks me every minute, tell me what you're doing. Or this you can't do, check with me, check with me. So if that's the culture you want to be, don't hire a Prabir kind of a guy. As an example, right? Then hire someone like that. So this is how you'll have to kind of play that if this is a problem, is your problem a hiring problem? Is it a philosophy problem? Is it a culture problem? And then see what parts you need to move. Helps? Free advice can only be this much, in a public audience.
There is a follow-up.
Yes, please.
So we are a research entity, an intelligence entity.
Yes.
So most of what we do is intangible, right? They might hit Eureka once in 20 days or once in a quarter. So these intangibles, and of course we're in a mostly permanent work from home culture. Now these intangibles to ensure that there is productivity, to be a company like Google and say work whenever you want to work, report whenever you want to report. There is no reporting culture, for example. How do we counter that? So what I'm saying is we want to be liberal. We want to make sure that there is more intrapreneurial blood.
Engage with them. Engage with them. Don't tell your people. Ask them. This is what we would like to do. What's your idea? I don't have time, but I remember a very interesting anecdote. There was a timber farm in Canada where they were losing millions of dollars because the timber was grown on one side, the factory was on the other side of the river, which shaped it. And they had got all the big consulting firms in. No one had been able to crack the problem. The site head once, finally in desperation, looked at one of those little scrawny little guys, let's call him Johnny, and said, Johnny, do you have any idea? And Johnny said, okay, if you want, you could do this, that, and the other. So this guy had nothing to lose. He said, let's try even Johnny's idea. And suddenly the log stopped falling off that conveyor belt, which, was taking the timber the other way around. Millions of dollars were saved or whatever happened to EBITDA. And top line, the CEO of the company flows down to the side and they're celebrating it and says, where is this Johnny who gave us this good idea? And he said, Johnny, when did you have this idea? He said, I had it 20 years ago. 20 years ago, he did his mental math, so many billions of dollars literally down the river, right? Why did you not tell us? No one ever asked. Please ask them. People will own their decisions. You don't need a Prabir Jha to come and advise you on this, right? But we don't ask. The tragedy is we don't ask. I firmly believe Papa does not know best anymore, period. If we can just follow that, you will get ideas, you will get ownership, you'll get energy, you'll get the culture, they will attract, your brand will grow. But if you want to be a guy saying, oh, everyone is here out to fleece me and rob me, etc., then either you're hiring wrong. If you have some actual cases, then you're hiring wrong. Correct it upstream. But don't try and solve an upstream problem downstream. It will not be worth the effort. Any other questions, reactions, rotten eggs, tomatoes? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for being a great audience. Thank you.